Hello, and thank you for joining today's webinar, Staffing Your Care at Home program. Our presenters today are two of our experts here at Current Health. We have Dr. Adam Wolfberg, our Chief Medical Officer, and Dan Yourk, our Director of Clinical Command Center and Solution Design. Adam oversees clinical innovation, research initiatives, and customer adoption of Current Health's Care at Home platform. Prior to Current Health, he served as Chief Medical Officer of Ovia Health and Director of Clinical Effectiveness at Athena Health. Adam is also a trained obstetrician and continues to practice at the Cambridge Health Alliance in Massachusetts. Dan oversees the Current Health Clinical Command Center and consults with clients on solution design. He is a retired Army Lieutenant Colonel, and prior to Current Health, he served as the Deputy Director of Operations at the Defense Health Agency Virtual Medical Center. Dan has over 6 years of telehealth and remote patient monitoring program management experience. And with that, I'll turn it over to Adam to introduce Current Health.
Thanks so much, everyone, for joining us today. We're really excited to talk about staffing at a time when staffing is a really challenging conversation in American healthcare. Dan and I are both at Current Health, so I'll tell you just a little bit about our organization and the products and services we provide. We work with health systems throughout the United States, large pharmaceutical organizations, and also health systems and pharma organizations in the UK to allow them to take care of patients in the home. We provide a complete suite of products and services from our in-house developed and manufactured vital sign streaming wearable that you see at the top left of the screen, to a variety of different peripheral devices that allow for other vital signs to be streamed to a central dashboard that's available on your mobile phone or on the web that allows you to manage patients really anywhere they are. And that's combined with the services of other in-home services that a patient may need, as well as a telehealth capacity. And using these products and services, we've helped the clients I mentioned a minute ago to stand up new programs enabling the comprehensive care of patients in a home environment. So let's talk a little bit about the staffing landscape, because we are at a difficult time. Here, speaking in early 2022, there's a crisis of both supply and demand. The coronavirus pandemic has not only decimated so many Americans and others around the world, but has also wreaked havoc on our health staff. And whether it's their personal health, or whether it's just the burnout from taking care of so many sick patients for such a long time, we've lost an enormous number of staff members across the healthcare system. And so at the same time, the demand for health services has certainly been on the rise. So how do you handle that? How do we handle that as healthcare professionals, as healthcare administrators, at a time when we need to staff existing beds and also expand capacity to take care of sick patients, either with coronavirus or frequently patients with other conditions that need clinical attention in the context of the coronavirus pandemic? We've, thinking about the sort of care at home paradigm, we've thought about figuring out how to leverage existing staff, but also how to excite other healthcare professionals who are burned out of working in a hospital-based or clinic-based environment, who get excited about taking care of patients in a novel setting. And so we've taken a number of different approaches with our clients to help them staff these care at home programs, both staff them from within a healthcare system and staff them based on a sort of combination of virtual and in-home staffing. So with that, what I'm going to do is turn it over to Dan and ask you, Dan, to talk a little bit about how you recommend approaching this problem.
Great, thank you, Adam. So there are many different types of care at home programs. I'm really going to focus on the first three and just elaborate a little bit on the last two, because the first three are really where I have my experience in the past and what I'm currently doing now at Current Health. So hospital at home and virtual wards, that is your higher acuity patients, those that are actually admitted into your facility but being cared for in their home. Here in the States, we have the CMS Hospital at Home Program waiver that a lot of hospitals participate in. And in the UK, it's really referred to more as the virtual ward. Synonymous with one another, they're pretty much the same type of support, but just providing high acuity support to patients in their home. There's a lot of requirements that come with that, and thereby your staffing models will differ depending on the type of support you provide. Post-acute or transitional care, most of my experience with that is what we did at the Defense Health Agency and the Virtual Medical Center. That was really focused on trying to get patients out of the facility sooner, or even preventing admissions for those that we wanted to monitor them, but they didn't really require any type of skilled nursing care. Typically, if a COVID patient comes in prior to this at our military treatment facilities, if they needed monitoring, they were admitted, even if they really didn't need skilled nursing care. And that's really where you can focus a lot of support post-acute or transitionally. And then chronic care is what we've probably been doing the longest with remote patient monitoring and care at home programs. And really what I'm excited about where we're going with that is the ability to do some postpartum hypertension monitoring. DHA is a leader in that right now, and moving forward with that a lot. And there's a lot of great outcomes that we're seeing from that. Next slide, please. So more specifically about the type of team that you'd want to develop for a chronic care type of program. It really differs depending upon the size of your organization, whether you're a small clinic versus a large hospital system, versus a larger integrated delivery network, such as DHA or Kaiser Permanente, one of those. So the type of team, the size of the team will differ depending on the type of support you're providing. But generally speaking, for chronic care, you want to have a nurse navigator, somebody to help coordinate care for those patients between their primary care manager, specialty services, and just really across that continuum of care. Your community health workers, social workers, helping out with those social determinants of health, getting a patient access to things they might not have access to, whether that be support services in their home, PTOT, things of that nature. The manager of the program is extremely important. We see this quite frequently, where an organization implements remote patient monitoring or care at home programs, and it's just another duty that somebody is assigned, and that can be really difficult. You need somebody who can manage that program and be dedicated to ensuring success. And your medical providers, having medical provider buy-in, whether that be your advanced practice providers such as nurse practitioners, PAs, or your MDs, having buy-in from them and being involved in the program is essential to the success of those programs. Next slide. So with hospital at home programs, the team makeup's a little bit different, especially if you're participating in the CMS Hospital at Home Program waiver. There are actually requirements about who needs to see the patient, how often they need to go into the home. There is an in-home visit requirement, both in person and virtual. And so the makeup of this team can vary a little bit depending upon the size of the program, where you're located, and whether or not you're participating in the CMS waiver. But generally speaking, what we've seen across many organizations, from an operational perspective, you have your program manager, you just have oversight of the program as a whole. Your clinical coordinators, again, just to help coordinate clinical services. And that can be your clinical coordinators who help coordinate day-to-day delivery of support in the home. And then you have your case managers who assist with long-term, so post-discharge from the program. And then logistics coordination, that's extremely important. Getting the capabilities and the tools into the patient's home, whether that be the monitoring devices, IV pumps, you name it. Logistics is so important to the success of any care at home program. Your clinicians, on the clinician side, we've seen a lot of the physicians come from internal support, whether that be an on-call physician at night. The more successful programs actually have dedicated physicians to the program, where they rotate physicians through, but they have a couple of physicians that are actually dedicated to the program to provide that oversight. Advanced practice providers, again, serving as extenders, nurses monitoring and in the field. This is critical. A lot of people don't consider this. You need nurses monitoring your patients, obviously, but then you have the nurses are going to go into the field and actually do in-home care. And it is a little different than what we've done in the past with, chronic disease management, home care type of stuff. These are higher acuity patients that require a different type of skill set. And then a lot of the programs use the MIHI paramedics to do wellness checks and to go in and make sure the patients are doing okay and to provide transportation back to the facility if necessary. And then one other thing I'll just mention about that before I move on, sorry. The type of staffing for this type of program is really going to be dependent upon whether or not you go with organic staff internally, whether you're going to try and build it out on your own versus, subcontracting or going to a vendor support. And so this makeup is pretty much bare bones. But if you're going to provide all support organically, you have to consider about, lab support, pharmacy support, dietary support, transportation. So it can get extremely complex. And this just outlines pretty much the bare minimum to go forward. Next slide. So I'm going to transition over to Adam and let him talk a little bit about staffing ratios.
Thanks, Dan. And I saw a question in the chat about staffing ratios, so it's perfect timing here. The ratios really depend, but a well-organized care at home program can get by on fairly staff efficient ratios. We see, this is just an example of a medium to high acuity COPD program where daytime staffing of 50 to 1 with a nurse and then up to 200 to 1 with a APP or a physician can take really comprehensive care of patients, particularly if the alarm settings on the monitoring technology are tuned appropriately to identify patients that are at risk of deteriorating while avoiding false positive alarms that lead to alarm fatigue. So it really does sort of depend on the acuity of the patients that are being monitored. Of course, it depends on the experience of the clinical team that's taking care of those patients and the access to additional services to support those patients in the home. But with experience, these can be pretty labor efficient programs. I'll just give you an example of one of our clients, how they thought about this for a slightly more acute population. They found that 2 nurses managed 40 patients during the day. Then they pivoted over to 1 nurse covering that same population at night. That allowed a significant amount of interaction between the nurses and the patients. The additional clinician participants in the program were interacting with the patients a little bit less frequently. The feedback that this client got from their patients was really fantastic. The patients felt very well cared for. They felt like they had attention when they needed it, that they were able to avoid spending time unnecessarily in an inpatient facility, and they were sort of left to the privacy of their home and their family most of the time, unless they needed attention. So, as we think about putting together that team, which is so essential to the success of the program, Dan, I think there's probably no one who has as much experience putting together a care at home team, both the group of clinicians that are getting in their cars and going out to see the patients, and also the clinicians who are monitoring these patients virtually, either from a distributed command center or from a brick and mortar command center. So, if you don't mind, maybe talk a little bit about the lessons that you learned while you were leading the Defense Health Agency's Care at Home Virtual Medical Center program.
Thank you, Adam. So I've been very fortunate to build a couple of teams over the last couple of years to support really in support of the COVID-19 pandemic. And so these are some of the things that we look for when we're recruiting for nurses, recruiting staff. We want people who are enthusiastic about charting the future of medicine. You can really hear it in their voice when you're doing an interview, when you're talking to them about our capabilities, about what we're trying to do. They kind of get like a blank look on their face. I don't know if that's maybe the person you want. You want somebody who's excited, who's interested, who really wants to be a part of that. People that are inflexible, unwilling to change, really will not work within your programs. There's so much change. There's so much it's a large requirement for flexibility within the program. That without that, they could actually doom your program. If you have somebody who's very rigid, wants things by the book every second of the day, you definitely need flexibility. You need people who embrace technology. There's a number of ways you can do that. During the interview process, the Zoom call or whatever video thing you use, you can really assess whether or not they can use technology. Ask them to chat with you, ask them to do different things, share their screen. You can do technology assessments. There's a bunch out there on the web. So you can really assess for that and then screen out the people that don't embrace technology or are not really good at it. Webside manner, I use this one all the time. And when I say webside manner, instead of bedside manner, how do they present themselves? Are they smiling? Do they look angry? Are they slouching? What does their background look like? Do they talk with their hands like I'm doing right now? Things of that nature. So those are the types of things that I look for when I'm doing an interview, especially when you're looking for a remote care type of team. You can do a little bit, you can get a better sense when you're doing in-person interviews, but when you can't do that, you really got to assess for all those other variables. You need somebody who's collaborative. I love asking the question of nurses I interview. If I were asked any of your coworkers or the people that you've worked with in the past to use a couple of adjectives to describe yourself, what do you think they would say? I think it's a really good indication of how they perceive themselves and then makes them think about how their coworkers would perceive them. You have to make sure they're a fit for your team. That's tough, especially doing it virtually. But just having honest conversations, doing multiple rounds of interviews. We do multiple rounds of interviews. And I think you can really get a good sense for whether or not that person's a good fit for your team. You need people who are adaptable. So if you, especially with the nurses that are going into the homes. So if you're hiring if you're going to do a hospital home program and you're hiring specifically for monitoring nurses and then nurses going into the home, you need to make sure that they're flexible, adaptable, willing to go into odd situations, patients that are hoarders that don't clean their house. You see a lot of different things that you would not typically see in a brick and mortar type setting. So you need that flexibility. You need people who are willing to kind of go above and beyond and help patients in those situations. All right, I'm going to go ahead and transition back over to Adam so you can talk about some of our lessons learned.
Yeah, and just as I think about how we've built out the clinical team at Current Health, but also worked with our clients, I would say that these are some of the key lessons that we've learned. It takes about 3 months to get a remote care clinician truly comfortable with doing their job in a whole new way. And so we've seen success, and we've seen our clients be successful when they invest in the onboarding process and really think about building a team. The care of patients in the home invariably requires a fair amount of remote monitoring technology. And so what we've also found to be successful is to have the clinicians spend time monitoring themselves as if they were the patient, so that they know what it's like to set up a kit and troubleshoot and understand the experience of being monitored outside a setting where there's always a care associate who can walk into the room and sort of set things up. So those are just a couple of additional lessons. The term that we've started to think about is the command center, and the DHA has a command center. Increasingly, we've seen our clients set up command centers. Current Health also set up a command center, and this is now under Dan's leadership. And so I do want to spend a few minutes talking about that virtual care construct. So, Dan, I'm going to turn it back to you and ask you to talk a little bit about how you think about setting up these organizations.
Absolutely, thanks. So multiple names for this: clinical command center, tactical operations center, clinical operations center. I've heard a bunch of different terms, but essentially it's all the same type of thing where you have people monitoring or program monitoring centrally patients that are distributed across time and distance. Whether that be, like Adam said earlier, a brick and mortar facility where you have all of your people come to one space to monitor patients, or like us, all of our staff are remote. So I have nurses that work for me from the East Coast to the West Coast, all different time zones. So you can really set it up in a number of different ways. And I've seen it successful in both ways. Some of our clients who have set up their own clinical command centers use the brick and mortar model where the nurses come in every day and they monitor patients from that location. And then I've seen others where they do it like us. So it can be successful both ways. I think there's a lot of benefits to doing it remotely, particularly recruitment. When you do it remotely, it doesn't matter where your nurses are located. If you can get them the technology, the equipment, and the necessary tools to monitor those patients and have redundancy in place, the nurse can be located anywhere, especially if they're part of the nursing license, the compact license agreement states. So those nurses have multi-licenses. You can really recruit and open up recruitment, especially in this time when recruitment is hard and when you're trying to do it locally. As far as the staffing ratios, Adam already elaborated a little bit upon that, but just wanted to give you some insight into where we came up with our numbers. For 24/7 support, we really recommend a minimum of 6 FTEs or 6 nurses. When you look at staffing models, and you take into consideration the number of hours somebody can work per year, then you subtract vacation and all those other variables, anywhere from like 1850 to 1920 hours a year is about what somebody can work. And when you look at 24/7 operations, minimum staffing, you always have to have somebody on site or remote, monitoring, and you have to have somebody on call if you don't have an organic structure behind you to do that. So that's where we come up with 5 to 6 FTEs minimum. Absolute minimum is 5. You're going to struggle. 6 FTEs will get you there. 7 is probably the best, honestly. And that would be for like a higher acuity type of program with 1 nurse monitoring 30 patients. And then if you're going to go into chronic disease management, same thing. You still need the minimum number of nurses if you're doing 24/7 support. But then as you grow your program, you can grow a little bit further before you need to hire additional staff. And then the responsibilities of clinical command center, we talked a little bit about this, but triaging patient needs, whether that be alarms or patients requesting support, understanding how to escalate patient needs, whether that be urgent versus non-urgent needs, care coordination, emergency services coordination, something to definitely consider if you're going to build out your own clinical command centers. Are you going to use organic emergency services, or if you're providing support across time and distance, like what we did with DHA, you really need to tie into the emergency services at each of the facilities that you're supporting. And then we use Schmidt-Thompson protocols for our triage protocols. There are other ones out there, but we really feel that's the best one and the most validated that's available out there today. Slide. And then third-party clinical command center. So Current Health, if you used us, we would be considered a third-party clinical command center. Why would you want to use a third-party clinical command center? It really does allow you to grow your program faster and scale a little bit quicker. Adam and I talk about this a lot. Our goal ultimately for anybody we support is that eventually they stop using us and they stand up their own program to provide that support internally. Well, from a capital investment perspective, that's not always possible. You can't go out. Some organizations can't go out and spend $1 million or $2 million on staff to be able to staff that program. They want to participate, they just can't staff it, or they have trouble with recruitment. And so that's where a third-party command center can come in and help to allow you to stand up your program, have people who monitor your patients for you, provide that additional level of support. And then as you grow your program, you show the return on investment, you can then get that capital investment that you need to then go out and hire your own staff and build out your own program. Next slide, please. So this is just for our nurses who are doing and this is just monitoring support. This is not a hospital at home program where you're sending nurses out into the home. That would be a whole nother type of layout. But this is our nurses. What we typically do is a very, very brief summary, but we do nurse-to-nurse shift report between the night and the day shift every morning. We respond to alarms, look at deteriorations. We proactively go in and manage patient issues, respond to patient needs. With our organizations that we support, we actually join their shift report and their morning reports so that we're tied into that, that structure, and we're aware of what's going on. So whoever's monitoring your patients, whether it be us or you're internally or another organization, having them as part of that communication, that morning report is absolutely essential to providing good care to your patients. We do have patient engagements based on taskings for us. So patient didn't do their blood pressure and they were supposed to do it at 9 o'clock this morning. We just want to do a check-in with the patient because we haven't checked in a while. Really just providing that kind of concierge white glove service, if you will, where the patient feels like that they're being cared for, that somebody's watching them, and knowing that somebody's there to support them if needed. And then we, go through on a continuous, it says 10-15, but it's really continuous, identifying potential decompensation based on vital signs, patient interviews, interactions with the patients. And then we escalate that to the next level of care, whether that be a nurse at the organization we're supporting, a physician if it's a higher level type of need, or even activating emergency response if the patient really is decompensating and can't wait for a physician interaction or anything like that. All right, and I think I'm going to pass it over here to Adam to talk about this one.
Thanks, Dan. And there's a question in the chat, and it reminds me, please, if you have questions for Dan or for me, feel free to put them in the chat, and we'll get to those promptly. But the question that was asked was, do these remote teams ever come together in person, or are they 100% remote? And I'll admit to you, as someone who's practiced in a hospital for my entire career, the idea of standing up a virtual clinical team was difficult for me to initially wrap my head around. And back to Dan's point about hiring truly outstanding clinicians, we at Current Health have found that is in fact possible. Now, I'm old school. I do believe that there's value in bringing people together to spend time in person to get to know each other. And so I think that there's a lot to be said for bringing teams together. At Current Health, we do it about 3 times a year, COVID allowing. But I think that I think that there's a lot of value in bringing people on site to see each other, think about new programs, get to know each other, really sort of cement those ties that make a high-performing team in a healthcare environment or in any other type of organization. But from a day-to-day perspective, allowing people to work remotely makes staffing enormously scalable and so much easier. And if you do a good job of hiring and are really methodical about making sure that licensure is appropriately in place, it's entirely scalable. To this slide, how do you assess if you need a third-party command center or whether your organization can handle it yourselves? In some respects, it has to do with capacity. Do you have a team of clinicians that is available to monitor patients who are in their homes around the clock? And can you do that without taxing the existing clinical team to the point where they're no longer effective doing their ward service or whatever their day job may be? What we've tended to see is that organizations that scale these command centers have a dedicated staff that is doing nothing but serving as the command center physicians, the command center APPs, the command center nurses, and the command center administrators, deploying out the appropriate in-home services and providing the virtual services as well. And obviously, as you begin to deploy either a hybrid or a virtual team, licensure becomes extremely important because although there were some exceptions made during the pandemic, those have largely gone away. And a basic rule of thumb is that the clinician needs to be licensed in the state where the patient resides, or at the very least in the state where the patient's receiving care. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to questions. We've got one in the chat, so please feel free to add more. And then I'm going to ask the moderators to read any questions that come in otherwise. The first one is, how is revenue shared between the hospital and Current Health if you're a third-party provider? Who undertakes the billing? How do billing codes differ from hospital billing codes? Or are they the same? So it's a really interesting question. How do you manage the finances of billing in a remote program? And a lot of organizations do it differently. Current Health's philosophy, which applies to our command center, is that the patients are our clients' patients. And so when we are taking care of them, when our nurses are taking care of them virtually, they're doing that as an extension of the client's clinical team. And so our team documents the care they provide, they document the time that they spent doing it, and then the reporting allows our clients to bill for that time and those services as is appropriate in the given clinical context. As you're probably aware, there's a whole CMS schema for remote patient management, RPM billing, a whole set of CPT codes, and so many of our clients are billing those CPT codes on behalf of the care that our team is providing with the appropriate documentation and reporting. The codes do differ, and we're certainly not billing experts, and I'd encourage you to talk to your billing experts in-house. But there are a variety of different codes for billing remotely delivered care. There's also the current CMS hospital at home waiver that Dan mentioned, and that allows hospitals that gain approval from CMS to receive hospital reimbursement for hospital level care provided in the home under certain circumstances. And if you have any questions about these, feel free to get in touch with us afterwards, and we're happy to talk more about these programs or the services that we provide, or provide some information on how we've thought about billing. I'm seeing one more question here. The question has to do with the regulatory aspects of this work. So there are a couple of different regulatory schemas here, and I again encourage you to talk to your institution's regulatory experts. The technology that Current Health deploys is all cleared through the FDA, through the Food and Drug Administration. And so obviously, if you're measuring vital signs on a patient, you need to use an FDA cleared device. The sort of technology and privacy standards, including HIPAA, govern the way that information is passed back and forth, whether it's vital sign information, whether it's video information, or whether it's just written information. And a lot of this involves electronic health record integration, which tends to be governed by HIPAA and regulatory schemas such as HITRUST. The regulatory structures for providing care in the home, like I said, tend to be within the sort of state licensure constructs. And so that's going to be the regulatory, the licensure agency in any given state. And we're happy to talk about how we've tackled that problem, because our nurses are licensed in each of the 50 states and territories in this country. There is an accreditation structure. It isn't Joint Commission, but there are other accreditors out there, and we think about that really carefully here at Current Health. So yeah, I mean, I think broadly speaking, there are a number of regulatory structures that you need to take into account, but generally your regulatory expert can guide you in the right direction. And like I said, super happy to talk about that further. There's a question about when does the CMS waiver expire? And that's a great question. It's unknown at this time. It looks like it's going to be extended at least for another year, while legislators and policymakers think about how to take a program that is demonstrably effective in terms of reducing cost and improving clinical outcome and figuring out how to make it permanent. Most policymakers, I think, believe that there will be a hospital at home program that is permanent. But I think in the interim, it looks as though the waiver is going to be extended on a year-to-year basis. Dan, let me turn this next question over to you. Did you recruit people to specifically support this work, or did you ask existing staff to volunteer and then change their working terms?
That's a great question. So we recruited specifically for this work, and all of the organizations that I've seen that are successful in building out this type of program have recruited specifically for this type of work. Those that have struggled to build out the program, those that have had a hard time going live or enrolling patients, it's because they did exactly what you're talking about, asking people to volunteer, or doing the voluntold, where somebody's told they're going to do this for a period of time and then trying to change later. That is not nearly as effective, and it usually kind of spells doom for the program, to be completely honest with you. So I highly recommend recruiting specifically for this type of work, because it does require a different type of skill set and a different type of person. You don't want to just push anybody into this role, especially if they're not willing to do it.
Thanks, Dan, very much. All right, and that's a comment. Yes, volunteered is not always what it means, and we certainly appreciate that. I think it goes back to what we said at the beginning, which is that this is a really innovative way of providing high quality, cost-effective care, and I think that there are plenty of clinicians and plenty of healthcare administrators who get really excited about being involved, and so this doesn't have to be a voluntold staffing problem. There are folks out there who are going to partner with you to make this successful. So Dan, thanks so much for joining me on this. I'm going to turn it back to the organizers at this point, and really appreciate all of you who've spent time with us today and asked a number of really great questions.
Awesome. Yes. Thank you so much, everybody, for being here and for all the great interaction. Wanted to give a quick plug for our upcoming webinar topics. We're going to talk about virtual wards specifically, and have a couple of clients on to discuss how they've gotten to some really excellent and sustainable programs there. And then we're also going to talk about EHR integrations and data workflows for care at home. So please watch your inbox for invitations to those, as well as a recording of this session and a copy of the slides. You're welcome to share that. If you have any other questions on this topic that you want to chat with us about, feel free to reach out. We would love to talk to you more. And with that, have a great day.